The Coronado Performing Arts Center is an iconic attraction in Rockford, and now people can sign up to tour the theater as individuals thanks to the Rockford Symphony Orchestra and Friends of the Coronado. Executive Director Beth Howard says they have done group tours, but it's been difficult to have individual ones. Saturday's tour also featured a performance on the Grand Barton organ, which was the first of these individual tours. Howard adds that thousands of people come for the shows at the theater, but don't have time to notice its detail and history, which she says is priceless. She urges those interested to sign up to get notified when upcoming dates are announced.
It could not be ever recreated. It's one of a kind. There's not another Coronado across the country. So we want our community to have as much access as possible to those memories, to that history, and to their crown jewel of Rockford, Illinois.